Hope for the hairless, Reagan versus Gaddafi, and the basketball coach who almost was at the U of R.
It all made news this week in decades past. Dave McKinley's back with News 8 then.
10 years ago this week when the Amerks retired the jersey of Jody Gage in a ceremony fit for the team's all-time scoring king, there was good news for junk food junkies as test marketing began on snacks containing the fat substitute Olestra. And even better news for guys like me when the FDA approved the sale of Rogaine over the counter
at generic prices, no less, this week in 1996.
20 years ago this week.
We would prefer not to have to repeat the events of last night.
You may not recall the code name of this particular action, but you probably do remember when U.S. warplanes bombed Libya this week in 1986 in retaliation for terrorist acts alleged to have been fostered by Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Although several nations condemned the U.S. for the raids which killed 100 in the vicinity of Tripoli, many at home were solidly behind the actions of Operation El Dorado Canyon.
I think it was a good move.
I'm with them all the way.
Shouldn't have done this a lot sooner.
It was 30 years ago this week that the Treasury Department reintroduced the $2 bill, and the University of Rochester introduced a new basketball coach, a 27-year-old named Mike Neer. Well, 30 years, close to 500 victories, and a national championship later, Neer still prowls the sidelines at the Balestra. Thing is, despite all his success, some still insist the U of R should have hired the other finalist for the job. This week's News 8 Then Pop Quiz, who was the other guy who nearly became head coach of the Yellow Jackets instead of Mike Neer this week in 1976. 40 years ago this week, when dressing up was absolutely the norm for Easter Sunday services, the first cargo ship of the 1966 season docked up at the port of Rochester, back when cargo ships were a somewhat common sight at the port of Rochester. It was the Gladys Bowater out of Newfoundland, and she carried 4,000 rolls of newsprint bound for the Gannett Company. This was back when at 18 stories, Midtown Tower still reigned as the tallest building in Rochester, and when American Airlines introduced nonstop flights from Rochester to Los Angeles aboard what was then the biggest passenger plane in the skies, the 180-seat Boeing 707. Boeing doesn't make the 707 anymore, and as for getting the direct flight from Rochester to LAX, well, that too is part of those bygone days, which we know better as News 8 Then.
Who did the University of Rochester almost hire as head basketball coach instead of Mike Neer 30 years ago this week?
The answer to the News 8 Then Pop Quiz is Jim Boeheim. Boeheim was in the running for the Syracuse job and used his U of R offer as leverage to land the deal there. The rest, as we like to say, was all News 8 Then.